We've got that the right way around, so
yeah,
3 more one side.
Yeah.
1, 2, 7.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Brilliant. Just check the fellow judges.
We will be asked. Thank
That's
you.
very kind. Thank you. That's fine. Whenever you guys are ready, don't rush.
You best believe
Are the teams ready? Are the judges ready? May I start the time?
Please do. Hello,
So thank you so much for coming today. I'm Zach. I'm the General Counsel of Auto Legacy Limited, and I'm joined by my client, John Smith. And just to preface this negotiation, we really do appreciate you being open to this meeting. And I know we've had a number in the past, and I look forward to hopefully coming to an agreement this time. But with that being said, I might pass over to John to just outline our overall position.
Thank you for meeting. We're very excited to discuss the future of both our prospective companies. In terms of the background of Auto Legacy Limited, we're known for essentially our global operations. So we have many chains throughout India, and our manufacturing capacity is spread globally. And we have a wide distributor network, and as well as this has helped us diversify that network to different consumer bases as well. And generally the trend that we see is that our consumer base is quite loyal. So that helps us meet a lot of our outcomes. In terms of why we're here today, we come to this negotiation with the interest of ideally an acquisition. We would love to partner with you, and we recognise that you are market leaders in developing sustainable transportation. Something of interest for us is definitely the impact you can make with environmental outcomes. It's something we're really looking at. CSG as well, that's something that we would really love to collaborate as well. In terms of the timeline, we are looking to move a bit quicker. So our timeline will be roughly 2 months in terms of staging, but I will hand over to Zach just to discuss any issues.
Thanks for that, John. And look, we really are excited to be here. I think there's a lot of good and excitement that comes in the future of both companies and some collaboration, which we can hopefully reach. And before I do move to just outlining key issues for us today, I did just want to take this opportunity to clarify my role in this negotiation as General Counsel. So as counsel, I do act primarily as in an advisory capacity throughout the negotiation. John has full and unqualified authority to agree to any outcome in this negotiation today. And I'll also assist, of course, in acting to protect John's interests and the contents of this negotiation, as the case may be. I would move now just to discuss the issues which really stand out for Auto Legacy and are quite key to us in this negotiation. So to put it simply,
introduce ourselves.
Oh, please.
Yeah. All right. I'm Guan Rong. I'm the CEO of EV Innovators, and we're very happy to meet with you guys today. I think this is an exciting opportunity for us to scale and get the reach that we want on the international platform, while possibly integrating the culture that we have, the innovative culture we have at our firm with yours, and to bring this to the global stage.
Right. So I'm Yuri. I'm the General Counsel for EPI. And so before that, as you mentioned, I think briefly that you were trying to say, going to highlight certain things that may be material to the negotiation. So maybe quickly, I could also point out a simple list of things that I would like to discuss, see if it aligns with. So I think firstly, what my client is very interested in is specifically the deal structure. I mean, obviously, right? You mentioned, I think earlier, John, about an acquisition. So obviously that's something we're open to, but we also are considering alternative deal structures. Specifically, we are looking to the possibility of a joint venture, as I'm sure you're aware. Secondly, something we wish to talk about also is the existing supplier relationships we have. So as you know, at EV, it's a complex beast, right? There are many different parts within it, and each one of our parts are sourced from different suppliers. And within that, there's also certain issues that may get tied up, including change of control provisions within these supply contracts, as well as the IP ownerships to these specific parts of the EV. So that's something that's very material for us as well. We also wish to discuss a little bit about governance and employee incentivization. So I believe this would fall under basically the control that we would have in any sort of partnership moving forward beyond today, as well as any way in which we can incentivize certain key members of our staff, including our CMO and CTO, who have been very integral to our company's success. Lastly, our 2 points of need to deal with is a potential not ongoing rather, but the threat of litigation, which I'm sure you're aware of. That's something that we can table for the later part of the discussion once we've confirmed the broad strokes of how we want the agreement to be. And lastly, we want to secure certain exit rights for ourselves in the event that we were to move forward with a sort of joint venture arrangement. Yeah.
So I think the main thing is that be it an acquisition or a joint venture, what we're looking for is long-term collaboration. Even if it is to be a joint venture, what we are looking is a long-term joint venture. So when we speak about exit rights, it does not only mean exiting the joint venture and leaving this collaboration completely. It could also be the other way around, such as changing in shareholding structures in the long term. So we would welcome discussions on long-term collaboration.
No, thank you. I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of the issues for us as well. We have identified quite similar issues. I did state broadly that we had 4. So the first, aligning with your first issue, is that deal structure. So of course, there's our preference for an acquisition, but depending on how this negotiation goes, we're more than amenable to discussing a potential joint venture, just outlining the terms of that deal. The supply contracts as well is the second issue for us, which we would like to flesh out. I think we agree with what you've said in respect of that, so I'm happy to just note through that rather quickly. The third one for us, this was your 4th point in liability, I believe you phrased it as.
Yes.
For us, in a way, we are seeking indemnities, just perhaps in respect of any legal issues which may arise. And in respect of the product recall from a few years ago, we appreciate the mitigation risk that you've no doubt taken in the years since that occurred. But we do just want to be quite clear in our position in ensuring that going forward that we are sound with respect to any potential deal that we enter into.
Yep.
Our 4th point was governance. So while you mentioned that our employer incentives, for us in terms of what governance looks like, it's quite important for us to ensure some control or some level of decision making in respect of the business. Of course, this would look different as to whether it's a joint venture or an acquisition, but I think we can address those later as they come. And in respect of exit rights, we're happy to address those as well as you've raised. John, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Oh, no, I'm happy with that. Are you happy with that structure?
Yeah, I think we're quite amenable with that. Could I just suggest that, for the sake of convenience, whenever we discuss the structure, we could probably talk about governance, because I feel like those two probably quite intimately linked. Yeah, so I think it's very difficult to discuss structure without talking about governance and past experience. So if you want, we are happy to either start with the structure and the governance, or we can start with the sort of easier to deal with points like supply.
I think actually, I think what we have here is really great that we have come up with a agreed set of heads of agreement. But perhaps what we could also work towards is to actually highlight what we each want to prioritize in this deal, so that perhaps we could, if we understand the end goal, then we can work towards that goal. Whereas these are so-called means to achieve those ends.
Yes.
So if I may ask, what are your long-term plans with EV? What we are aware of currently is that there has been an effort to make a push into the EV market by Auto Legacy. However, there has been some stalling, and that there is pressure to essentially play catch up with the industry. So we were wondering, if we were to go through with any transaction today, what would that look like?
Of course, I'm happy to address that question. So in respect of why we would like some sort of collaboration between our companies, this primarily goes towards us meeting environmental and social governance, and as well corporate social responsibility outcomes. This is something which would help expand Auto Legacy, and as well as this really alleviate those reputational outcomes, and something which we have viewed quite highly. We have made an effort in the past to do this, which it was unsuccessful. So this is something which is of key interest coming into why EV innovators today.
Of course, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in the past we've discussed that it's now 2025, right? As we trend and people grow up, the younger consumers now really are demonstrating a preference for that environmental responsibility. And while I believe that Auto Legacy is still quite strong in those over 40. Those under 40 are demonstrating a preference for electric vehicles and more sustainable options. So it really would be ideal for us to be able to break into that market and appeal to a larger and a wider demographic, while in turn scaling and assisting with your business growth.
I think we agree with that. Those are, we appreciate, and I think our priorities are aligned there. But to me, that doesn't really justify why an acquisition is required as opposed to a joint venture. So I guess we'd really like to understand what it is that is driving towards an acquisition as opposed to a joint venture.
So I suppose in terms of this, we would like to integrate the advanced EV technology into our own systems and to further accelerate that technology into more sustainable vehicles on Auto Legacy's part. As you do appreciate, we are a wide distributor network across the globe. So I suppose implementing those technologies, not just in India, but across the world, would be helpful to achieve those outcomes.
Perhaps to put this into, I suppose, a bit more legalese, which you might appreciate. It's important for us that if we did proceed with an acquisition rather than a joint venture, that it would enable us a greater degree of control in really assessing and driving where the products are going and ensuring that we really have a streamlined focus and ultimately final say in how we can structure EV products going forward to us. Whereas if there is a joint venture, which of course we are open to, then there would be more discussion in how those key decision-making responsibilities will be allocated.
Right. So just to clarify what you're saying here, sounds like when you want to acquire us, it's not just about opening new revenue verticals. What you're interested in is also basically harnessing our technology. So there will be essentially a question of whether the intellectual property will grow as well across, and obviously in the form of an acquisition, you would have the full proprietary rights to our intellectual property. So I see where you're coming from that perspective. So what I wanted to say is sort of, you have to understand that we are at the moment still an expanding startup. And it's perhaps not entirely a startup, but we are still at a stage where we feel like we haven't maximized our value yet. And so that's why we're sort of not so keen on acquisition, because we feel like we're losing out on a lot of value if we sell our entire stake now. Whereas we believe that if in a joint venture, we can continue to grow and reach a stage where we're more comfortable of realizing the true value that we believe that EPI holds. And that's why we're full disclosure leaning more towards a JV. And that's why also I think if we were to sell right now, it would come at sort of a premium on what your valuation of us is, taking into account the sort of potential growth that has been untapped thus far.
And I think barring the transactional structure here, essentially the core of our business is actually innovation. It's literally in our name. And so as you can see, we've recently established a state-of-the-art research lab facility, which is actually driving these innovative solutions to EV dynamics, right? And so our concern with regards to an acquisition where your client has essentially excessive control over this creative direction or marketing direction or operational directions, our concern is that the key of our business would essentially be treated as a research facility for your company, whereas these are actually visions of key personnel in our company that we do want to see come to fruition to a certain extent on our terms as well. And for example, in the case of a JV, what we would be open to doing is to sort of have a board of governance, for example, in order for our key personnel to oversee the operational decisions that are being made.
And of course, you would have a seat on the board. Yeah. Or distribution of the seats. Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. It's really helpful to understand the rationale behind that. I suppose this somewhat goes to the timing and structure of it, but as I think I mentioned in my opening, we were looking at a timeline of 2 months in terms of thing. Do you have a timeline in mind?
Why is your timeline 2 months?
In terms of why, this is because we will be, we basically want to take a step and be proactive in our environmental responsibility that we're taking. So as we've mentioned before, EV Innovator stands out in the market in that sense. You have developed a sustainable vehicle, which has not just gone well, but has been quite successful.
What kind of pressure are you under in terms of pushing through an ESG initiative? Because I think that's been going on in this industry for a really long time. So we just don't really understand why it's compressing the timeline to 2 months.
Because 2 months obviously is much shorter than say a year, which gives us more time.
Due diligence alone would take, a month essentially.
No, of course. And just to clarify, it's not pressure that is the be all and end all and would curtail any agreement which we could reach. But if I could just perhaps clarify John's point, and feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything. But as you know, we as a key manufacturer and a business make annual climate related disclosures. And this year we have noticed a focus that because we have been slower, we acknowledge that we have been slower to break into the EV market, that there is more of a call to arms for us to do that. So the reason for that 2 months timing, and of course an agreement doesn't necessarily need to be fleshed out in detail that, but we would like to in 2 months when we have to make those disclosures to show that we have a clear path.
Like a commitment.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just correct me if I'm wrong here, but would an announcement of a potential collaboration would that suffice? Because as you know, the moment a news hits the market about such a potential collaboration, I think the markets will naturally react positively, especially if it's something that you're concerned with. So is it possible for us then to say not so much a 2 months timeline, perhaps a 2 months to have sort of a somewhat of a progress towards a working solution, just so that you can get your ESG commitments in line, or announce to the world basically that you are working on something tangible?
That's definitely something
Yeah.
that would be open to. The interest behind this is making sure that the market itself knows that we are being proactive in those steps.
Of course.
And I think just to clarify that if it was an announcement, of course, we wouldn't need to flesh out direct deals, but perhaps providing some metrics or some sort of roadmap at the very least, which would indicate that it's not simply just a statement that we're making.
Yeah, and would your team be the one in charge of the social media market?
Or would you prefer to leave it to our CMO? Because we know that you've been struggling sort of on that front with regards to social media.
That would be something we're open to. In terms of, we'd be more open to that, especially given that we have a strong social media following. And
But perhaps putting it another way, and even in, I suppose this would align more with going towards a joint venture that we could work collaboratively. And because your business is so apt in environmental sustainability and goals, that it could be something that our client could then learn from and continue to develop, which would then in turn assist a potential collaborative joint venture if we reach.
I think this is a very apt moment to say that perhaps if we can't right now, we are I think a bit reluctant to both commit on either whether it's a JV or a full acquisition because we haven't fleshed out the material terms yet. So perhaps we could look at some of the material terms before circling back to this at the end, once we sort of have an idea of where we're giving up on exactly. So I think supplier contracts, is that something that you're okay to be a discussion on?
Yeah, well, I'm happy. Just before I begin, I suppose with the supply contract, as you're aware, we have an exclusive supply contract with Dynavac, and you did mention before that we had a change of control.
Change of control.
Yes, provision. Would you mind speaking to that a bit more?
Sure. Perhaps I can speak on this since it's a legal matter. So what this means is basically anytime there is some sort of change of control of who controls, in our case EEI, this clause will be triggered, and they essentially have the option to terminate their agreement with us unless they give us some sort of consent beforehand that they are okay with control changing over. So most obviously, if it was a full-scale acquisition, this control provision will kick in. And we have reason to believe that even under a JV scheme, this is likely to play a material part as well, because in some way you will have control over our operational decisions if we were to move into a joint venture and Dynavac will supply the batteries to this particular joint venture. So that's something I want to basically let you be aware of.
However, I'd just like to add that in regard to operational decisions regarding the use of the batteries in the cars that are produced under the JV. If we do have more influence on that specifically, seeing as that's predominantly licensed to us to use in the first place, I think they would be more agreeable to not trigger the change of control clauses. And it would be easier for us to bring that to them instead.
Could I just ask if Dynavax has expressed why they rely so heavily on these change of control clauses? Are there any specific reasons for it? Or?
I think it's just standard sort of M&A precaution in case, let's say, we are being bought over by a company that's hostile to them, and that we may currently, sever the relationship or take advantage of the existing relationship to their detriment. So I think that's why there's a sort of change of control provision there. So it's nothing specific to say like we're not, at risk or anything. It's just a standard practice for them.
Yeah. And let me just put it into context what our relationship with Dynavax is. I think there's been a slight misunderstanding that I'd like to clarify here. And that's Dynavax is our exclusive supplier. So in addition to the change of control clause, they are our exclusive supplier. And when we negotiated that with them back in the day, that was to our advantage because it meant that our competitors did not have access to that, right? But what we are saying is that if we do have better operational control as to how those batteries are used in the products that are produced under the JV, right? Then in this case, we may be agreeable to loosen this exclusive supply contract, which would allow them to license use of the batteries to the JV as well.
Alternatively, it could be sub-licensed from us to the JV or sub-licensed from us.
Essentially, we could loosen the exclusive agreement if we had essentially more board influence, the board of governance influence with regards to potential JV. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes, with the supplier, the reason why I asked those questions is because Auto Legacy has considered that arrangement quite efficient, and it's something that we would like to explore, the relationship between both the parties and Dynavax moving forward. Could we just seek a clear assurance that if there was to be a joint venture, I know you've outlined the change of control clause, would Dynavax still be the supplier post-acquisition? But do you have a
Yeah, I mean, we can't definitively say that they wouldn't want to invoke their change of control provisions because we'd be speaking on behalf of them. But to my knowledge, and based on my understanding of the legal context of this provision, there's nothing to say that they would necessarily trigger it, especially if we explain to them sort of good faith that we are entering into this arrangement with. And I think they're more than happy to essentially potentially get another customer for their batteries.
Yeah, as we mentioned, the exclusive agreement was actually to our advantage.
Yeah.
And now if we all, share success in this joint venture, then we don't see a reason why they would vehemently object to it and be hostile about it. But did you have any other concerns with regards to our supplier relationship?
Yeah, just while we're on the Dynavax point, has been made clear to me that this is a rather important point for my client. And even if we are to enter into a joint venture, we would view maintaining that supply relationship with Dynavax, whether that's with its exclusivity provisions in force as they are now or otherwise, as it's in a way a non-negotiable for us. At the very least, we'd like to treat it perhaps as a condition precedent.
Okay, I think what we could do is this, right? I think what we could do is we could sub-license with obviously with their consent, and we would have to bring this back to them. But we could sub-license the use of Dynavax batteries to the products under the JV, and that way you retain a relationship with Dynavax. However, we would need to secure basically an anti-sub-licensing clause with you guys, so that you're not sub-licensing that product to another company or with another JV. And would that be agreeable to you guys?
Would you be open for that potentially over time being phased out to go beyond the JV to Auto Legacy, so that if we later down the line develop our own electric vehicles, that perhaps those batteries would be something that we could use pending the success of the joint venture, if that's what we enter into.
I think what we're considering here, or what we're cautious about, obviously, is to protect our own domestic market.
Yes.
So that's something we're considering. So I'm not sure if we explore this idea of potentially geolocking the use of the Dynavax product. And also specifically, of course, it would depend on the relationship with Dynavax, whether Dynavax wishes to license it to you as well. But I think what we're more concerned about is that we don't want to lose market share in our Indian market, which is our home market, and we have extensive connections with the government. So we're very protective of that home market. But of course, we understand that you are here to help us take us to the international market. Yeah.
However, we are also aware that, given that this is a long-term collaboration, we don't want to, we would not want to be in a position whereby our products are in competition with yours, which are, independently produced, but also using Dynavax batteries, seeing as that is our unique selling point. So we would request for that time frame of the exclusivity provisions being phased out at a pretty long time scale. So maybe 8 to 10 years, for example, seeing as that is the typical product cycle of a vehicle model as a year. Yeah. But apart from that, is there any other concerns you have with our supplier relationship?
I think where I look at is the uninterrupted supply. So ensuring that Dynavax is able to meet the capacity, given that we'll be scaling up to the global market as well. Just pretty much ensuring that everything is in order on Dynavax's end.
So are you saying that, asking us if there's any issues with Dynavax at the moment?
Yes, if you have.
Yeah, pretty much we've not been given any information to that effect. Also something I just wish to clarify. So you said you're interested in Dynavax core, but are you aware that the core is not the only part of the product? So essentially what gives us that special edge in the EV market is not just the core, but also what we have patented,
Yes,
which is the sort of shell that wraps around the lithium-ion battery, to put it very quickly.
So essentially, Dynavax produces the lithium-ion module. If you were to dismantle an electric car, you would see little boxes of lithium ions in there. But we actually own the patents for things like the casing and other components around that to basically apply the energy that's stored in the lithium-ion modules to a vehicle. And so that is also why we would like to retain a pretty influential role in the board of governance on the JV, seeing as that is also the key thing to what we contribute to this transaction. It's not just the product of Dynavax. Obviously, they are a wonderful product. They've done us a really good deal over the years. But that said, we also bring value to that as well.
Yeah.
Look, I think pending, of course, any deal with respect to the joint venture, I think that could be something which we would be accepting of. However, we would seek the very least an exclusive license in respect of that technology for the joint venture. And if you're receiving, I suppose, increased board rights with respect to the joint venture, then we view that as something which would be right.
So could you just repeat that again? The exclusive license to the JV, is that what you're saying, for this particular technology?
Yes, for the technology for use by the JV.
Wait, so can I clarify, does this mean, are we still allowed to use this technology for sale of our own products outside of the JV? So essentially what that means is when we sell cars in the Indian market, obviously we're going to need to use this technology. So we have free rein to continue using that, right? We're not assigning that license to the JV. It's just that we wouldn't be able to license it out to another party, for example. For the duration of the JV exists. Is that something we could do?
That would be something. The reason for that license is, again, that interest of integrating technologies into our own. So if that is achieved, that is primarily our interest in that respect.
And I know you mentioned that 8 to 10 year timeline at which we could look at then broadening that license and allowing it to extend over our potential product line with respect to electric vehicles.
Subject to a geolock?
Yeah, for that time, that is something we can still discuss. And I think we will be accepting of a geolock with respect to India. That seems to be your...
Yeah. I think that's it. It's fine. Is there anything else that you should-
So, yeah, essentially, we also have other suppliers with whom we do have very close relationships. For example, Bharat is an OEM and a supplier of our drivetrains. And I think what I'd really like to do is to reassure you that the potential issues we may face with our suppliers are fixable, and it is incredibly likely that we would avoid any conflict with them.
I
To
think
that end, oh, sorry, please.
So I think what my client is referring to is our understanding that Bharat Autotech is essentially a big supplier to one of their main competitors, Maruti, I believe.
Yeah.
And what my client is trying to reassure you is that it is basically market norms for these OEM suppliers to basically supply components to competitors, simply because of the nature of how the market works. And so we want to reassure you that this wouldn't be basically a blocking point for the deal to go ahead.
For example, could give a few examples. Really, Boyson makes exhaust pipes and cooling pipes in China for Mercedes, Audi, and BMW. Bosch supplies cooling parts and gaskets for all sorts of different cars. If you're maintaining a Toyota from a Toyota to a BMW, it's all going to be Bosch. Brembo Brakes as well supplies brakes to other people, but essentially, commercially, it's just components in a car that companies don't find it efficient to fully invest their R&D in, unless you're really like Ferrari that really wants to design their own brakes or airflow systems, for example. So we don't think this would be a major issue moving forward. It's market norms for this to occur.
Just on that point, I suppose, can I ask if, with respect to any of your suppliers, if you've faced issues relating to that in the past?
No. So I think with that being said, I think we've more or less wrapped up on the smart point. I think we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward to,
I believe it's the government. I think you want to talk about
Yes, we're happy
or
to
control. Yeah, government.
governance and control. Yes. We're happy for you to start with.
Take the lead on this? Okay, yeah, sure. So, like we mentioned earlier, and then I think we've discussed as part of this that we would like to basically take the lead on the JV, essentially in terms of basically how the JV works, 50-50 ownership, so profits likewise split 50-50, just about who controls it. We would like to sort of have a controlling stake, as mentioned earlier, because of our earlier agreements. And just would like to point out that one of the reasons we need a larger stake as well is because we need to give one of our board seats over to a VC, which currently has a minority stake in us, and they've requested, because as part of the change of control provision, if we want them to greenlight the deal, they are requesting that they have a board seat on any sort of arrangement moving forward, which in this case, if we're talking about JV, will be a board seat on.
That's not to say that they will be drastically changing our commercial decisions. That's not what they want, actually, because the VC would not want to actually meddle in how we design our cars and all that. Put bluntly, what they want are returns, right? And returns are what we jointly want anyway.
Yeah.
So we don't think there'd be any conflicts of interest with having our VC there, seeing as what they want is aligned with what we want. And that would be amenable to them.
Can I just clarify that VC, that's Horizon Delta?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Is there any particular aspect of the JV that you would like to seek exclusive monopoly or control over? Or that you're particularly concerned about that you want to have control?
in respect of this, we did consider introducing a new CEO into this joint venture. I'll just outline some expertise. So
Right.
his name is David Clark, and he's the current divisional CEO of the global passenger vehicles unit. So he does have significant expertise in this area, and he's overseen multiple product launches themselves. And the reason why we're considering this is just to maintain strategic and financial oversight. We do trust David's credentials, and in this respect, we find that he would be quite in good stead to lead the joint venture.
And I would also like to add on as well in respect of that, we would also like to appoint a CFO who similarly, she's the Vice President of Corporate Finance within Auto Legacy, and she's very well known in managing complex integrations like what this joint venture could ultimately become. So if we are moving to or accepting of Horizon Delta Partners obtaining a board seat, then we in return would like those appointment rights with respect to a senior executive and perhaps 50% of the joint venture board seats.
So you would be expecting 50% of the board seats that would be a 50. Or
Right. So in terms of board seats, we would ideally like to have a majority. That being said, we welcome the appointment of the CFO of your choosing. With regards to the CEO, could we return to our respective boards and perhaps both come up with an ideal candidate and then compare it at the next meeting? Is that amenable?
Primarily what we're concerned about is basically the compatibility with our own key players, right? Because who we need to keep on board are Alex Gray, our CMO, who has been essentially influential to our market campaign, as well as Dr. Mehta, who is our chief engineer and director, and she leads basically all the EV research. She leads a very talented team of engineers. And what we're particularly concerned with, and that comes with this sort of merger and acquisition, is essentially a potential cultural clash. Because what Dr. Mehta especially is very concerned about is keeping a sort of innovative culture. She wants to, of course, be at the forefront of EV development, and she doesn't want to be somewhere where, growth is stagnating and that, they're shifting away from innovating and developing new technologies to simply churning revenue numbers. So that's something we're particularly concerned about. And that's why I think my client says he wants to take this back to the board before we can give you an official confirmation that we're okay with proceeding with your respective nominees. In the alternative, however, if you were to give us a majority control over the board, I think we'd be much more comfortable with just proceeding with your appointments, since we have the sort of comfort of knowing that in the event of any sort of clash or basically the CTO, we can call Dr. Mehta the CTO, I suppose, of the JP as well as the CEO. We would have sort of a more control over how that gets resolved, essentially.
I think we have to draw this out to the bigger commercial picture that we are in currently. It's that there has been an attempt on your side to, enter the EV market, right? And there has been delays there. And so that is the value that we bring to you to drive this innovation and to drive this entry into the market, which is why on the surface, it seems more intuitive to me for one of ours to drive it. But we are also conscious that in a JV arrangement, there needs to be mutual appreciation and mutual learning. And so we appreciate the fact that I think we would welcome the fact that you could appoint your CEO, and but we retain the board majority so that we could steer the company that JV in the right way.
And apologies, I think correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe a bit tired, but I did make a note here that we agreed previously with regard to the suppliers that if we were to give an exclusive license of the use of the battery technology to the JV, we would be reflected in the form of an increased board representation on the JV. So could I clarify if that's still a clause that we're looking for?
Just to step back, you mentioned majority control.
Yeah.
That's just the board. I suppose just to take a step back, the reason why we are proposing a CEO and board seats generally 50% is because there are some concerns, at least internally, in terms of the expertise of some of the directors. You mentioned Dr. Mehta.
Yeah.
There are some reservations from our end in terms of her continuing as a director, more so for experience. We would like someone who is put in good stead and has led a few times and has that commercial awareness in order to create successful.
Yeah, so when you mean put concerns about her, so are you saying that you want to remove her from the JV or that you don't want her running the JV?
In this respect, it would be to remove her from the JV.
And what are the nature of the concerns? So if you could just elaborate on that, because we're not aware of that.
It's more so experience. So we have some reservations in terms of her experience within these day-to-day operations. So it's an operational experience. But if you have more information regarding her experience.
If I might clarify, we do understand her experience, but it's our view that that experience is best suited in the day-to-day operations, which she currently does in respect of EV innovations. But in managing and overseeing a complex joint venture like this potentially would be, in our view, she's not the right fit.
Right. So I think there's two things here to highlight. Firstly, I think we're a bit confused on why you want to remove Dr. Mehta, because her skills lie in primarily her role as chief engineer and director of the engineers. So she's sort of the head or the brains behind our AI push. I'm sorry, not AI push, EV push. So a bit confused if we remove Dr. Mehta, isn't it kind of removing the value add we have to this JV as well, since she's in charge of the EV engineers? But to that end, I think we understand what you're coming from in terms of you want a more experienced CEO or CFO. And I think we're really only comfortable going forward with that sort of arrangement to exclude Dr. Mehta, who's been integral to our success. And you can understand how that may potentially ruffle some feathers within our internal structure. And the only way we'll be able to move forward with that is if we obtain a board majority over the JV, if you want to sideline her and completely from the JV.
But my apologies. I think to some extent, perhaps the lack of sleep has gotten to all of us.
Right.
We do recognise the value that Dr. Mehta brings, and it wouldn't be necessarily an exclusion from the JV, but at the very least, she wouldn't be running the JV. And I do note what you've raised in respect of you being accepting of perhaps senior executive appointments if you retain a board majority. But I think the concern that we have with that is that if you did have a board majority, well, then even if you do accept our appointments, well, then there's nothing to stop you down the line than just kicking them off and moving someone else in.
Okay, so it seems to me the issue here is that there is a fear that this would be a one-time arrangement, that, now that we're talking about it, you guys can appoint and then we get a majority, and then tomorrow we can be like, hey, now we have the majority, we'll turn around and remove it back. I think what we could do is have some tenure provisions here in terms of the tenure during which your appointed CEO would sit there, and that with the board majority, my board could be agreeable to cede appointment of CEO rights to Auto Legacy with regards to this, because we understand again about that mutual learning and appreciation nature of and JV arrangement, and that's something that we want this deal to emulate.
Right, and also I think because we're just ultimately concerned that if Dr. Mehta doesn't have a role in the JV, the JV gradually would lose value over time, because again, we want to emphasize that one of our strong points is bringing EV research and the sort of technology.
And I think, and I think if the concern is Dr. Mehta's ability to, run day-to-day activities, I mean, we've all met individuals who are very adept in their individual skills, but they might not be so adept in management, and we do recognize that as managers ourselves. But what could I propose that we have Dr. Mehta in as sort of a CTO in the JV, such that we retain her expertise, continue to give her that platform to deliver the value that she brings to our transaction, such that she does not interfere with the management of a full-scale operation as a CEO would.
So her leadership would basically be limited to the engineers that she's currently helping.
Which is exactly what she's adept to do.
Yeah.
That's something to be open to. I suppose, just to reframe it, our concern here is just maintaining strategic and financial oversight. So that's something in terms of Dr. Mehta. We understand that she is integral to your side of the joint venture, but in respect of ours, we would like to reconcile that. I know that you mentioned with the board 75% at this point, that wouldn't be something that's viable in terms of board.
I don't think
Sorry.
we'd manage to get 75%.
Majority.
Yeah.
But I'll revert to council.
Yeah, look, I think if there is a majority stake being sought with your, I think was it your VC having a seat as well, that we see what we bring to this joint venture really is that expansion of scalability on a global scale, and we are contributing a lot in that regard. So we see that in order for us to best make available our network and our manufacturing capabilities, which are known for their reliability, that perhaps at the very least at this stage it could be an equal 50-50 split, at least in respect of the board However, we get those appointments that we want. Dr. Mena stays on as CTO, and in respect of the exclusivity, that perhaps we could reach some royalty agreement instead, so that you could obtain some ongoing cash flow and capital as a substitute.
I think firstly, with regards to the board majority, I think what we can consider is basically if you have 50-50 amongst both of us, but then the VCS board seats. So if there's 11 seats on the board, you get 5, we get 5, one goes to the VC. Yeah, that could be the structure of how the board would look like. Then we would scrap the tenure arrangement because that was something we were offering to reassure you that if we had the majority, we wouldn't take away your key position. So do away with the tenure provisions. We'll keep the idea of you guys having the appointments of the CEO and CFO. We'll appoint, perhaps we can put Alex in as well since he's our CMO. We will appoint the CMO and CTO, right? Which is Alex and Dr. Meta respectively. And then with regards to you mentioning the exclusive license, perhaps for now, we wouldn't consider an exclusive license, but you're mentioning something, sorry, I think about a royalty fee?
Yes, instead of then an increased stake in the joint venture, we could offer royalty payments in respect of that exclusive license.
But would that be able, would the commitment to bringing us to an international stage that still be present as part of the JV?
Yes, that's
Yes.
what
Okay.
So it would be present on the basis that all our manufacturing networks are spread across.
Right, so we would be able to draw on that as part of
Yes.
the JV. And then so instead of giving you an exclusive license, which would give you, you would trade it down for a royalty.
I think that's a great.
Yeah, I think that's a
lot. We would have to again bring back to the board.
But I think this is very promising.
I think this is promising. Yeah.
Okay, so we've tidied up that on the essentially the governance in case of the JV. Yes, who will sit on the board and the sort of key appointment holders that you sit down. So I believe next up we'd like to talk about the liabilities.
Yeah.
Correct, with regards to the board.
I think we'd really like to engage with this as well, and be fully transparent with you. There has been a voluntary recall with regards to Volt Racer, as I'm sure you are aware. We did everything we could to swiftly resolve this, as in, send in notifications. People came in to get their cars sorted by implementing a firmware update and a hardware replacement program. There have been no legal claims filed to date, and which is why we don't see this as a high risk to this transaction, seeing as what the recalls that we have issued have been addressed. So there is no outstanding issue with regards to the litigation risks.
And I think as President Council, I should get ahead on this and also mention that we're very keen to basically have so much control over the conduct of any future dispute or related settlement, because we feel like we are responsible for it. So we would like to basically take the lead on any sort of potential legal claims, none of which have materialized yet on this particular matter.
Because it has nothing to do with, this transaction, because this recall occurred much prior to this transaction.
Exactly.
I think just from our order legacies point, thank you for disclosing that. We're just a bit concerned about potential for ongoing liabilities moving forward.
Right.
I was talking to my counsel about this, if I'm wrong, but something like the indemnity work.
Yeah, at least in respect of potential issues arising out of the Volt Racer recalls.
Right. If you're looking at indemnity, I think we would like for it to be capped, because I think an uncapped indemnity is extremely dangerous in this sort of transaction. What we could do also is to basically give you the full information about what the recall was like and basically the components that was faulty as part of the due diligence process, so you can research into that as well. But if there were to be any indemnity being discussed, I think we would like for that to be capped at a certain amount. Is there an amount that you're particularly looking at to secure for the indemnity?
Would you be happy for it to be capped at around 8 million?
Is there a reason for 8 million?
Just to ensure that these recall claims, they can go quite high depending on the issues and the actual effect of the stuff in respect of them. So we feel that to ensure that we do have, I suppose, full coverage to some extent in respect of any potential issues that will come up.
But honestly, we're looking at a much lower figure with regards to indemnity. Our client, I think, mentioned, our board highlighted that around 2 million is the figure that we're looking at with regards to indemnity cap. If we were to go any higher, I think there will be sort of sunset provisions on this particular indemnity, we would not like the indemnity to stretch on forever. Perhaps after a period of a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, the sort of indemnity would have to lapse because we don't want to essentially continually be bound on this particular matter, till the end of time. Yeah.
I suppose to that regard, then, if we were to drop the cap down to 5 million for perhaps then a term of 8 to 10 years, the same as potentially to evaluate those exclusivity and license terms with Dynavax, and then reevaluate at that stage and reassess as to whether there are still perhaps potential issues which may arise in respect of the bulk racer.
I think while I understand the sentiment there that you want to protect your client's interests in regards to defending against risks of litigation, but I think 8 to 10 years is a little bit excessive, given the product cycle of cars, essentially. In 8 to 10 years, the issues that were already highlighted 3 years ago, would have already lapsed for more than 10 years, essentially. And so we don't think that I don't think the board would be amenable to exposing us to this indemnity for that protracted period of time. So if you could reduce the time frame to, let's say, 5 to 6 years, seeing as it is a voluntary recall, we did not receive any regulatory complaint. And after we issued the voluntary recall, it is, after all, the choice of the consumer to come and get it fixed.
Yeah.
However, again, like counsel said, we can pass you all information on the issue during our due diligence.
So to summarize, would you be willing to take like 5 million indemnity cap for, let's say, 5 years? We can give you warranties as well that we have acted accordingly properly on this particular matter, and that there are no ongoing legal claims today.
If we did agree to that, would you be happy for us to reevaluate that indemnity at the end of that 5-year period and see if there have been any issues which may arise, and if so, that we could potentially extend that liability and reassess at that date?
Sorry, I just want to clarify. What do you mean by reassess? So if there had been an issue, then wouldn't the indemnity clause trigger, and then we would pay out the 5 million?
Yes, but we would like it in that regard then to be continuing. We see that if there is an issue that arises, let's say in 3 years, which would then be 6 years after the voluntary recall was effective,
I think
protection.
I think what our board would most likely agree to is actually we would be agreeable to be bound to speak about this and to engage you to activate a review, essentially. But I don't think we'd be agreeable to be bound to extend the indemnity if there has been any issues, again, given that the product cycle has already passed by.
And particularly since you are also aware of this and you've given warranties on this and you have the due diligence on this particular issue. And so it's a no liability sense, even though there have been no active litigation on it. So that's why we're quite hesitant on basically extending it.
I understand that. In respect of this, the concern is just throughout the period of the trade action, we want to mitigate as much risk as possible. So that's why our council has suggested that 8 to 10 years. Can I just ask, is there a reason why the duration could be a bit smaller? Is that just perhaps you can get
I think
It's just extraneous risk that is unnecessary exposure for us. But if really 8 to 10 years is a stickler, we're willing to agree to that if the indemnity cap is reduced to perhaps 2 or 3 million.
Or in the alternative, if there's no, like, I think the extension thing is something that I'm quite hostile to, pretty much.
In that case, will we maintain the cap of $5 million? And in terms of the actual length or duration of it, keep it for, say, 7 years, and then have an option to reassess that last year?
We're fine to extend it to 7 years without the extension.
Okay.
So basically a simple boilerplate indemnity for $5 million for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yes, but without an option to extend.
Without
Without
the option to extend.
Is that something that you agree to?
I think in that respect, I prefer anyone to extend it, just in light of anything happening. It is quite a new market.
In that case, could it be, let's say, 3 million for 5 years with an option to extend?
We are quite stuck in 5 million. That would be.
I think in this case, it's pretty difficult for us both to
Yeah.
come to an agreement on this. Probably the biggest factor involved, but just setting out our position, I think it's quite unlikely that we will accept any sort of offer with the idea of an extension. So we prefer it to be clean, neat, a certain sum that lapses after a certain period of time. That's the most we're willing to indemnify you on what essentially we still believe is more or less a non-issue. Right.
And I think in the interest of time, could we, for the sake of completeness, speak about certain exit rights with regards to, for example, certain lever provisions for auto legacy, and preferably on our end, we would like for bad lever provisions to be included, and we hope that it would include violation of the licensing agreements that we have, seeing as we're licensing
fee,
exactly, and the royalty fee that we agreed with, and possibly an infringement of IP. We don't want to see a situation whereby you see, Landwind in China producing a look-alike that's like a Land Rover Evoque and being able to sell it for 5 years.
Look, I think that's something that we could be open to if in respect we could seek the same from you.
Yeah,
I think that's
that's
very fair.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah, I think we can basically in the last 3 minutes run through a summary of what we've agreed today. Right. So I think what we've concluded is that we would move forward with JV structure. In terms of the supply contracts, we've determined that after review that there's not much material issues with regards to our current suppliers. We've reassured you that our current suppliers, even though there are change of control provisions, that they're more than likely to proceed on this particular matter. Is that okay?
Yes, and just to clarify that,
Yeah.
that would be adding us onto that exclusive, just supply contract which you mentioned as well.
With respect to the James potentially in
yes.
the future, I believe it was.
Yes. Which we agreed to be geolocked.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Lots of things going on around it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it wouldn't be a exclusive license of the technology of the Dynavax battery to the JV. So we agreed on some form of royalty fees of the lithium-ion battery. So I think because of the fact that we want to have the majority here on board.
Sorry. To clarify, we would have the exclusive license, but we'd offer royalties in exchange for.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. That's one. Okay. And then with regards to the governance of the board, governance of the JV, I believe we agreed that the board seats will basically be split 50-50 between us. How that may be reflected +1 essentially for the VC, who represents the minority stake on us. You will get appointment rights over the CDO, CFO, and we will get appointment rights over the CMO and CTO, right, to be filled respectively with our own key appointment holders. No sort of tenure provision, given that none of us actually hold the majority of the board.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And then
all right, the indemnity. So we've agreed, basically our position on this is quite clear that we want a capped indemnity that has no option to extend, but you would prefer something with an opportunity to extend. Yeah, and so we agree that we'll both take this back to our board and see whether we can come to a better agreement in the future on the indemnity point. And so exit rights, yes, as like I mentioned. So exit rights for both parties, which reflects
It's essentially bad lever provisions for both sides, which should include violation of the licensing agreements. And an infringement of IP.
And then just to clarify, I think there was the minor thing earlier with respect to our our climate related disclosures.
Yes.
right. So basically an announcement that we will be starting a collaboration with, which can be run by our CFO.
Yes.
I think that would be a great start to this fruitful collaboration, and as well it solves our problems and raises both companies together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I request the judges to choose either team for the question answer round, and I request the other team to wait outside, please.
Well, given that I'll get the numbers wrong, 127 went first. Why don't we let you guys go and have a break, and we'll ask one through each questions first.
I believe for the question Q&A.
So thank you very much indeed. If I can start with just an open question. What were your two primary objectives when you started this? And how do you think you fared against those two primary objectives?
I think that we outlined at the start that what we wanted was the ability to scale and to reach an international audience. While we did not disclose this openly to them, we also wanted to do that without giving up this sort of control over the creative direction, as well as the agreements that we have with Dynavax, seeing as that is our unique selling point, which is why we were very reluctant for them to be able to enter an agreement, a separate agreement with Dynavax to use their batteries in Auto Legacy's own cars. So I think we were pretty stern about the JV arrangement, and we managed to push through that. And it was only through the JV arrangement, as opposed to a full acquisition, that we are able to stay true to our initial goals of, scaling and reaching an international audience,
while also not compromising on essentially the IP and technology to form the unique selling point.
Right. I've got one follow-up question for, I'm sure there'll be more, but where do you think you ended up with the IP arrangements and the license and the exclusivity?
Right. I think our understanding was that in the end, what would happen would be that we would still have the right, obviously, to manufacture our own cars with the technology that we had. What would happen would be, in a sense, we would sort of license our battery product to the JV, which would then be able to use it to produce cars and sell cars on the international stage. However, we wouldn't be licensing our technology to other companies to enter into similar arrangements with them. And in a sense, that was sort of the exclusivity provision that they were talking about. And then in the end, we also mentioned something about changing it to a royalty instead of having expanded exclusive license for them to use the product, which was basically what they caved on in exchange for not giving us a board seat. Not giving us a majority on the JV board eventually.
And how much were you going to get paid for those royalties?
That's something that we didn't discuss as part of the negotiation, but from what we understood, it was not so much the royalties that were important to us, but keeping the right to use that sort of technology. The financing from them came on in the form of capital investment, the ability for us to leverage on their capital goods, essentially to produce cars on an international stage, to sell our cars on through their distributor networks to their client channels as part of the JV arrangement. That was sort of the expansion overseas part.
Okay.
Yeah.
But since this was the most important point for you, like you wanted to reach the global market.
Yeah.
But what was your understanding with them on using their network? Because this is a JV.
Yeah. So I think
not give access to their marketing channel.
Yeah, no, but I think when we discussed with them, they seemed very open, and they mentioned that I asked them, so would this compromise on our ability to use your infrastructure to sell our vehicles overseas? And they were like, yeah, of course, this is part of the deal. So I think that was something that we were both in agreement about how this JV will be moving forward. We'll be using their infrastructure to scale overseas. But I think that's why we focus more on, since we're both on agreement that we want to take this international, we focus more on how the control of this particular venture will work. Since it wouldn't make much sense for us to both pat each other on the back and say, oh, well done, thanks for taking us overseas, or thanks for giving us the opportunity to tap into the EV space.
I think something to note as well is that pretty early on, we realized that they would be in more of a rush than we, because they had that timeline to reach in order to declare that they're committed to ESG. And we were also under instruction to basically not feel rushed to enter into an agreement, seeing as we do have our own plant in Germany already, and we are already essentially a market leading product because of our relationship with Dynavax. which is why we were not so concerned about those points raised earlier.